Let me ask you something real. What if the collapse wasn't a curse, but a calling? What if everything you lost wasn't taken to punish you, but to protect you? What if you called failure was actually the sound of spirit slamming the door shut before your soul signed a deal it couldn't survive? Welcome back to Empowered Shadows. And today we're talking about something you may not have words for yet. The moment your life fell apart and you thought God had abandoned you, but looking back, you realize it was divine interruption. You didn't just lose the job, the relationship, the stability, the home status. You were pulled out of something you didn't know would kill your calling. This episode is for the ones who were forced to their knees and thought it was punishment, when it was actually protection. We're talking about the difference between collapse and redirection, how spirit answers prayers through disruption, why certain relationships had to crumble without closure, what divine timing actually feels like, and how to stop calling loss what spirit calls liberation. Because sometimes the greatest mercy is what didn't work. When the collapse was the clarity, you didn't plan for it to fall apart. You begged, you prayed, you held on, you tried to fix it, fight for it, forgive it. You even called it growth when it was just survival dressed up in a spiritual language. But when the breakdown came, it wasn't gentle. It was violent, sudden, and final. You weren't just grieving the loss, you were grieving the illusion. Because what you thought was stable was actually slowly killing you. What you thought was love was a leash with scripture attached to it. What you call your person was a portal to the version of you that couldn't thrive. So when it all came crashing down, yes, it hurt. Yes, it shattered you. But it also cleared the path. The collapse made space for clarity. The breakdown made room for breath. And the silence that followed wasn't punishment. It was your first moment of peace. The prayer you didn't know you prayed. You asked for peace, but didn't know it would come through loss. You asked for alignment, but didn't know it meant being ripped from what you swore was your destiny. You asked for healing, but didn't know it would require exposing the rot you called roots. You thought the breakdown was a betrayal, but it was an answer. It just didn't come in the wrapping you expected, because sometimes spirit doesn't remove you gently. Sometimes spirit yanks you out of rooms your soul can't breathe in. Sometimes the door doesn't close quietly. It slams so loud you lose your hearing for a season. And that silence, that ache, that moment you thought God forgot you, that was the beginning of your actual prayer being answered. Not the one you whispered at night. The one your soul screamed when you didn't have the language. And spirit heard it louder than your logic, louder than your attachment, louder than the version of you who thought suffering was a sign of strength. You weren't abandoned. You were delivered. The blessing had to break you first. We always think the blessing will come soft, wrapped in comfort, dipped in ease, spoken in tongues we already understand. But some blessings come sharp. They come like thunder. They come through people who betrayed you. They come through jobs that ended without notice. They come through silence you didn't consent to. They come looking like loss, because anything less wouldn't have made you leave. If it didn't hurt like that, you would have stayed longer, justifying, minimizing, compromising, calling it timing, calling it love, calling it growth. But it wasn't any of that. It was spiritual captivity. And it had to break. Because they were building around you wasn't just a relationship or a role. It was a containment center. And so the blessing came. But it didn't come to soothe you. It came to shatter what was shrinking you. You didn't get what you wanted. You got what you needed to become what you prayed for. Stop calling it failure when it was freedom. You didn't mess up. You didn't fail. You didn't fall short of your forever. You outgrew the version of yourself that was willing to shrink for what looked good in photos. Stop calling it failure when it was your body saying, I can't do this anymore. Stop calling it regret when your spirit was saying, this isn't where I belong. You weren't being punished. You were being prioritized by your higher self, by your ancestors, by the divine contract on your life that refused to let you die in what was beneath your calling. What you thought was the end of the road was the beginning of a different route. One with less applause, but more alignment. One with fewer witnesses, but more truth. The blessing wasn't wrapped in a new opportunity. It was hidden in the exit you didn't want to take. But you did. And that's why you're free. They watched you break, but not rebuild. When you were falling apart, everyone had something to say. Some pointed, some gossiped, some laughed, some left quietly in hope the silence would finish you. They thought the breakdown was your ending. They thought it would strip you of your dignity. They thought it would prove them right about you. But they didn't see the rebuilding. They didn't see what you did in the dark, the nights you sat with God, trembling, but still choosing life. The days your body remembered trauma, but you still showed up. The moments you didn't retaliate because you chose healing over revenge. They didn't see how the silence taught you to listen. How the empty rooms became classrooms for your soul. How what broke you open also broke the cycle. Let them remember your breakdown, but you remember what happened after that. You rose, not with applause, not with closure, not with company, but with clarity. And that's something they'll never be able to take, because it didn't come from them. It came from God. When Spirit closes the door, don't claw it back open. You begged for a sign, and when it came, you didn't recognize it because it looked like rejection. It looked like the end, like being ghosted, like being overlooked, like being left out. But you weren't being left out. You were being shielded. The closed door wasn't denial. It was redirection. Redirection in a language your ego couldn't translate, but your higher self understood fluently. Sometimes Spirit doesn't give you what you think you want, because it would have cost you who you actually are. That yes you cried for would have delayed your evolution. That relationship you mourned would have devoured your frequency. The role you wanted so badly would have put you in proximity to something you weren't supposed to inherit. And so it ended abruptly, painfully, perfectly. You can be heartbroken and grateful, grieving and clear, tender and wise. Just don't go back. Don't beg for access to the last thing that broke you. Don't water the soil where God pulled the root. There is nothing for you there, because your blessing wasn't buried. It was planted in a different field. Don't go back. There is no reason to. The life you prayed for didn't disappear. It detoured. You didn't lose it. You were rerouted to a version of you who could carry it with grace. They thought you were being punished. But what really happened is that heaven interrupted the curse and refused to let you finish your story in the arms of your oppressors. You didn't break down. You broke through. And now you see that the storm didn't destroy you. It delivered you. They didn't just see you fall. They expected you to stay down. But the breakdown, it wasn't you losing your mind. It was you losing the weight of everything you were never meant to carry in the first place. The guilt, the projections, the roles, the lies you absorbed and wore like your own. You didn't collapse because you were weak. You collapsed because you were full of pain that wasn't yours, full of silence that was never meant to be holy, full of masks that kept your soul suffocating under a performance. It was a sacred unraveling, a mental and spiritual undoing of every false identity they convinced you had to uphold, just to be worthy of love that was never safe. And the moment you dropped it all, the moment you ran away, they called you crazy, but you knew you were finally coming home to your spirit. Let them talk about your breakdown, but you'll remember it for what it was. The day the dam broke, the day pretending stopped, the day you walked out of their story and started writing your own. Your conversation with God was not a conference call. This is Empowered Shadows. Thank you for listening.